A most desolate position for a lighthouse. The Bell Rock and Eddystone a joke to it. 20 years after Walter Scott wrote this in his diary on an expedition to Skerryvore in 1814, lighthouse builder Robert Stevenson would get a chance to write a report after petitioning much of his professional life for the reef to be illuminated. He wrote this in his report to the Northern Lighthouse Board. The rocks of Skerryvore lie 12 miles south of the island of Tiree and about 35 miles from either of the lighthouses of Barrowhead and Rins of Islay. This reef forms a very great bar to the navigation of the outer passage of the Highlands, a track which is used chiefly by His Majesty's vessels of war and first class of merchantmen. It is also an obstacle of no small magnitude to the foreign trade of the Clyde and Mersey. The rock on which it is proposed to build this lighthouse forms the foreland of an extensive tract of fell ground lying off the coast of Argyllshire. The reef has long been the terror of the mariner, but the erection of a lighthouse upon Skerryvore would at once change its character and render it a rallying point of the shipping which frequents these seas. 2 years later, Robert Stevenson's son Alan would be making preparations to build Skerryvore. And of critical importance, first things first, was sourcing of stone. And during the summers of 1836 and 37, a Mr. James Scott and 14 quarrymen cut out around 3,800 cubic feet of Tiree gneiss, with some stone used for the tower, some for rubber walling, and some were going towards a new wharf composed of pierre perdue. Translated directly from French to English, this means stone lost. In Alan Stevenson's notes, he wrote pierre perdue as blocks rough from the quarry thrown promiscuously into the sea. Now, the first major undertaking pertaining to the rock itself was finding somewhere for the men to sleep, because they had to be travelling back and forward from the rock. And much the same as his father's Bell Rock model, was to construct a wooden barrack to house and billet the men. After the first building season, while Alan Stevenson was at home in Edinburgh, he received a letter to inform him that one of the worst storms in 16 years had managed to rip the iron base and thrown 2 anvils metres across the rock. Now, in the 3 years in which Alan had been in preparations for the actual building of the tower, they had lost half a barrack, blew numerous holes in the rock with dynamite, scaring the locals to bits, really, built a new wharf and pier, opened up 2 new quarries, built a new steamship and barges. They'd built accommodation for the stone cutters on land as well. Amazing. So in 3 years, crazy amount of work. In the 1841 census, out of 113 people living on Tiree, work on Skerryvore gave them 45 masons, 18 wives and 1 surgeon. In April 1838, an Aberdonian builder, Mr. Charles Neilson, was to choose, along with the foreman Mr. John Scott, 30 masons or stone cutters, 12 quarriers, and 3 or 4 smiths for, quote, 2 years of certain employment, unquote. He offered 3 shillings 10p per day for masons and 2 shillings 6p a day for the quarriers for the stone masonry works. 7th of August 1838 was the first decent day of work on the rock due to a number of failed attempts to land in bad weather conditions. Alan Stevenson took on board 4 carpenters, 16 stonemasons and quarriers, and a smith to sharpen and make tools. They then set about basically quarrying out a foundation, while the joiners put up the barracks. Middlemas was the joiner foreman at this time. And now, so the boring of one of these holes was taking upwards of 8 hours, but by September of that building season, the pyramid for these barracks was actually complete. By the 12th of November, though, they had received a word from a clerk at Tiree basically saying they would need to come back next year and build it all over again because it had basically been blown apart in a storm. During the winter seasons, they must have been putting the masons to other work though, which is decent, I think, of them, because they left 16 masons, 12 quarriers and 4 carpenters on Tyree. They were to build rubble walls, they were to build housing for the workers and blacksmiths and the joiner shops, and also they were to sort of dress and build stones for the pier as well. And so the gneiss being sort of so unpredictable and difficult to work, in 1839 they opened a pink granite quarry in North Bay Mull, where they employed 6 masons, 12 quarriers and a smith, and they also had some native labourers alongside them. Must have been just to shift stuff, maybe train some native labourers, a wee bit of a sort of apprenticeship there, which is quite nice to hear. Because after they'd been quarried, the blocks would have then had to have been cut down and shaped. And there's obviously a whole process to that, and it takes skilled tradesmen to be doing that job. I've got loads of videos on how to mark and cut stone, so if you're interested, give my other videos a watch and like and subscribe. Also, there's a whole load of stonemasonry jargon involved here, so I'm going to just skip a load and get on with it because this could be 3 or 4 hours long. So I'll get more on to the point of the video, which was sort of about the men that built it. There seemed to be an issue again of mutiny, the same as the Bell Rock. Stevenson was apparently annoyed by the cowardly conduct of the seamen. They didn't think it safe to be mooring so close to the rock, and even threatened to leave the vessel on the rock with the men still on the rock if they didn't receive a boost in their pay and in their rations. So he had them sacked. And then after it, he had a few desertions, and and Alan Stevenson seemed like a bit of a dick, to be honest. It wasn't like his father. His father had sort of been brought up from less, and he'd been brought up in more of a privileged position, and they seemed to like writing a wee bit more than they enjoyed engineering, it seems. And for what I've read, the conditions on the barracks were absolutely horrendous. Stevenson had mentioned that in his own quarters, hearing cries from the apartment which housed the men above, as they clattered to the floor when a ferocious wave smashed into them one day. And to be honest, it seems like they deserved their pay rise after having sort of enduring weather like that. And I think I have more in common with the stonemasons on that lighthouse than either of us do with any of our bosses. And so they laid the first stone in July of 1840 with the assistance of the Duke of Argyll and his wife, with the rest of the work obviously being carried out by Charles Stewart, the foreman mason, and the rest of the absolute madmen on that rock. The Duke of Argyll was even that impressed, he even left a tip. The stones were so perfectly dressed back ashore by the stonecutters, Charlie Stewart and his boys were putting away about 85 blocks a day, these big granite blocks. In 1841, 38,000 cubic feet of granite were dressed with square beds and joints, a double curvature on either face, and joggles, Lewis holes cut into every single stone. When they finally got up to a decent height, the crab crane became obsolete. So they had to revert to using a 34-year-old balance crane which had been used on the building of the Bell Rock. Have a look at my video on that. I'll put a link in here. The final stones of the tower were built by the end of July 1842, with the final height of the Skerryvore Lighthouse being 137 feet and 11 inches in height and weighs 4,308 tonnes.